Good day. Our topic for today is Title 9 on crimes against personal liberty and security. Let's start with Section 1 on illegal detention. Who can be made liable for kidnapping and who can be made liable for serious illegal detention? When are these crimes committed by the accused? So if you notice in Article 267, there are actually two felonies defined and punished under the said article. You have their kidnapping and the other one is serious illegal detention. Who can be made liable? You have there any private individual who shall kidnap if it is kidnapping, and who shall detain another if it is serious illegal detention, or in any other manner deprive him of his liberty, shall suffer the penalty of reclusion perpetua to death. So to identify the proper felony committed by the accused, it depends upon the overt act performed by the accused. So either kidnap or detain another. And the penalty for reclusion perpetua to death shall be imposed upon him under the following situations. If the kidnapping or detention shall have lasted more than 3 days. So that is at least 4 and up. That shall be kidnapping or serious illegal detention. Second, the penalty of reclusion perpetua to death shall be imposed upon the accused if he committed the crime by simulating public authority. In other words, he pretended or simulated to be a public officer, thus facilitating the commission of kidnapping or detaining another person. Next, if any serious physical injuries shall have been inflicted upon the person kidnapped or detained, or if threats to kill shall have been made. So under the third scenario, you refer to the definition on what constitutes serious physical injuries. If the kidnapping or detaining another is accompanied by the infliction of serious physical injuries, then the penalty for reclusion perpetua to death shall be imposed upon the accused under Article 267. Or if threats to kill shall have been made in the course of the kidnapping or detaining the private complainant. Next, if the person kidnapped or detained shall be a minor, except when the accused is any of the parents, female, or a public officer. What does the fourth scenario tell us? That the penalty for reclusion perpetua to death shall be imposed upon any private individual who kidnaps or detains another, and the person kidnapped or detained is a minor. And this presupposes that the private individual charged against this particular provision is not any of the parents of the minor. Another scenario, if the victim is a female, or if the victim is a public officer that has been kidnapped or detained by another private individual. The penalty shall be death where the kidnapping or detention was committed for the purpose of extorting ransom from the victim or any other person, even if none of the circumstances above were present in the commission of the offense. This paragraph would tell us that if the purpose of the kidnapping or detention is for ransom, even if none of the four scenarios as enumerated in this article be present, then the penalty of death shall be imposed upon him. In other words, the ransom bearer qualifies the kidnapping and serious illegal detention. Last paragraph, when the victim is killed or dies as a consequence of detention, or is raped, or is subjected to torture or dehumanizing acts, the maximum penalty shall be imposed. So this would tell us as well that death shall be imposed upon the accused if the person being kidnapped or detained was killed or died as a consequence, or has been raped, or has been subjected to torture or dehumanizing acts. So death penalty shall be imposed upon the accused. Now you have to remember as well that the imposition of the death penalty has been suspended. And the law further provides that automatically the penalty to be imposed upon the accused shall be reclusion perpetua. So let's try to go over the elements as defined under the law. The offender here is a private individual. This is a situation wherein had it been a public officer, it would have been arbitrary detention. But since the accused is a private individual or a public officer who has no authority to arrest or detain another, then it may fall to this particular provision included in the element that the offender is a private individual. Overt act of the accused, he kidnaps or detains another, or in any manner deprives the latter of his liberty, that the act of kidnapping or detention must be illegal, that the commission of any of the offense, the following circumstances is present. Again, that the kidnapping or detention lasts more than 3 days, it was committed by simulating public authority, or serious physical injuries are inflicted to the person kidnapped or detained, or threats to kill are made, or that the person kidnapped or detained is a minor, or a female, or a public officer. To reiterate, with respect to the minor, it should not be any of the parents of the minor that is responsible for the kidnapping or the detention. Judge, under what circumstance that a parent could be charged under the provision? This is a scenario wherein the minor there whose custody was awarded to a specific parent only. Now, Judge, what if the perpetrator is one of the parent of the minor? Again, it is not covered under this provision, but it is covered by another provision of the RPC. So, as highlight of the article, if the offender is a public officer with authority to detain, again, the crime would be arbitrary detention. When victim is a minor and offender is one of the parents, it shall not be covered under this provision, but you have there Article 271. The penalty shall be arresto mayor or a fine not exceeding 40,000 pesos or both as provided under Article 271, Paragraph 2. Detention or locking up of victim is essential and placing in an enclosure not required. Why is it that there shall be detention or locking up being essential element and yet placing in an enclosure not required? If you notice in one of the cases mentioned by Reyes in his book, enclosure not required because the victim there was placed in a hut or kubo and they can roam around, they can go out from the kubo to outside. However, they cannot live freely at will from the premises. Hence, enclosure not required. Restraint need not be permanent. In other words, it could only be temporary for as long as there was detention or locking up of the victim or the victim was deprived of his liberty, then it may constitute the crime as punished. And the detention must be illegal. On your screen is special complex crime of kidnapping with murder. Again, special complex crime is different from that of complex crime. where the person kidnapped is killed in the course of the detention, regardless of whether the killing was purposely sought or was merely an afterthought, the kidnapping and murder or homicide can no longer be complex under Article 48, nor be treated as separate crimes, but shall be punished as special complex crime under the last paragraph of Article 267 as amended. So if you notice in the article earlier, you have there the last two paragraphs. So they are special complex crime, where the death penalty shall be imposed upon the accused. Under this special complex crime, the killing here could be the purpose of the kidnapping or detention, or it was merely an afterthought. For as long as there was kidnapping, there was killing, then the crime shall be kidnapping with murder. But when the victim is taken from one place to another solely for the purpose of killing him, the crime committed is murder in People versus Camo. So how shall we harmonize these two principles as enunciated in these particular cases as decided by the Supreme Court? This would tell us that in special complex crime of kidnapping with murder, kidnapping there is the principal purpose of the accused. The kidnapping there could also be um, the kidnapping there is the primary purpose, and either the killing there is purposely sought or merely an afterthought, for as long as it is the kidnapping that is the primary purpose of the accused to designate the crime as special complex crime of kidnapping with murder. In the case of Camo, this would tell us that the purpose is solely for killing him. Okay? So if the purpose is solely for killing, it may involve taking of the person or the victim from one place to another, then it should only be murder, as enunciated in the case of People versus Camo. So please take notice, solely for the purpose of killing, then that should be murder only. How do we distinguish illegal detention, specifically serious illegal detention, from arbitrary detention? The crime of illegal detention is committed by a private individual who unlawfully kidnaps, detains, or otherwise deprives a person of liberty. An arbitrary detention, on the other hand, is committed by a public officer or employee who detains a person without legal ground. Illegal detention is a crime against personal liberty and security, while arbitrary detention is a crime against the fundamental law of the state. Another distinction is that in serious illegal detention or illegal detention, it is committed by a private individual, while the arbitrary detention is committed by a public officer. Again, the public officer who has authority to arrest and detain another person. 268 for slight illegal detention. The penalty of reclusion tempora shall be imposed upon any private individual who shall commit the crimes described in the next preceding article without the attendance of any of the circumstances enumerated therein. The same penalty shall be incurred by anyone who shall furnish the place for the perpetration of the crime. If the offender shall voluntarily release the person so kidnapped or detained within 3 days from the commencement of the detention, without having attained the purpose intended, and before the institution of criminal proceedings against him, the penalty shall be prisión mayor in its minimum and medium, and fine not exceeding 100,000 pesos. So let's try to dissect the elements of slight illegal detention. As to the perpetrator, you have there the same as serious, that is private, any private individual who shall commit the act of kidnapping or detaining another as described in the preceding paragraph without the attendance of any of those enumeration 1, 2, 3, 4. Meaning to say, the victim was released 3 days below, okay, prior to the not more than 3 days, or it was committed without simulating public authority, or there was no threats to kill, the victim is not a minor, nor was he a female, nor a public officer. So the crime is only slight illegal detention. Now, I call your attention to paragraph 2. It punishes anyone who shall furnish the place for the perpetration of the crime. This particular accused is performing an act of an accomplice. Okay? He did not perform or he did not participate in the commission of the crime, but his participation could be prior to or simultaneous to the commission, but it's not part of the kidnapping or the detention. However, he furnishes the place for the perpetration of the crime. This is another overt act not pertaining to an overt act pertaining to illegal detention. But the law specifically provides the same penalty, meaning to say the same penalty as the penalty of the perpetrator in a slight illegal detention, that is reclusion temporal. So this second paragraph would be an exception to the general rule that an accomplice shall be imposed a penalty 1 degree lower than that of the principal. And this provision shall prevail over the general provision with respect to the imposition of penalties according to the degree of participation of the accused. So to reiterate the elements, the offender is a private individual as mentioned in the law. He kidnaps or detains another or in any other manner deprives him of his liberty, that the act of kidnapping or detention is illegal without the attendance of any of the circumstances enumerated in Article 267. So I've mentioned this already. You have there the penalty for an accomplice, same as that of the principal. With respect to the last paragraph of the law, there are actually three mitigating. No. There is a mitigating circumstance that is provided under the law, and please take notice that all requisites must concur so that the penalty to be imposed upon the accused shall be mitigated. What are the three requisites that must concur to constitute a mitigating circumstance under slight illegal detention? The accused voluntarily releases the person kidnapped or detained within 3 days from inception of the kidnapping or detention. He must have not attained his purpose and prior to the institution of the criminal proceedings against the accused. Unlawful arrest 269. The penalty of arresto mayor and a fine not exceeding 100,000 pesos shall be imposed upon any person who, in any case other than those authorized by law or without reasonable ground therefore, shall arrest or detain for the purpose of delivering him to the proper judicial authorities. Now, can you still recall Article 125? Because the arrest there was legal. And the purpose of the accused there is to deliver him to the proper judicial authority. However, he failed to deliver the arrested person to the proper judicial authority, hence the crime of delay in the hence the felony of delay in the delivery of detained person, arrested person to the proper judicial authority. Here, it is committed by any person. The purpose there is to deliver him to the proper judicial authority. However, the arrest is not authorized by law, or meaning to say there is no reasonable ground or legal purpose to which the victim should have been arrested by the perpetrator under Article 269. Elements of the crime: the offender arrests or detains another person. The purpose is to deliver him to the proper judicial authorities. However, the arrest or detention is not authorized by law or there is no reasonable ground therefore. Let's try to recall element number 3. You have there not authorized. What are the grounds to which a person may be arrested even without a warrant? You have their commission of a crime and violent insanity. So specifically on commission of a crime. So in other words, under this unlawful arrest, the act of the person that was kidnapped, that was arrested or detained is not for illegal, not for a lawful or legal or authorized ground for the arrest or detention of another person. In other words, he is not committing a crime. Unlawful arrest versus illegal detention. If the purpose of locking up or detaining the victim is to deliver him to the proper authorities and it develops that the detention is unlawful, then the offense shall be unlawful arrest. In any other case, the detention will render the culprit liable for other illegal detention. Let's try to illustrate for a clearer understanding. Thus, when F and P had a dispute as to the right of P to cultivate the land in question, a fight ensued, and having beaten P, F tied P with a piece of rope and conducted him to the municipal jail, where the jailer kept P for several hours, until he was released by the justice of the peace. The court ruled in U.S. versus Fontanilla that the fact that the accused immediately conducted the complaining witness to the municipal jail takes the offense out of the article for illegal detention and brings it within 269. Now, why is it 269? Why is this constitutive of unlawful arrest? Now, take note that you have there no right to put the law into your hands. And please take notice that the right to cultivate the land is still in question. So we cannot brand the perpetrator here to be exercising his lawful right because there is still a pending dispute or question with respect to the ownership or the right to cultivate the land. Okay? So do not put the law into your hands. Unlawful arrest versus delay under Article 2125. In the crime of delay in the delivery of detained person to the proper judicial authority, the detention is for some legal ground, but in unlawful arrest, the detention is not authorized by law. Under Article 125, the crime is committed by failing to deliver such person to the proper judicial authority within a certain period of time, while in unlawful arrest, it is committed by making an arrest not authorized by law. In other words, no period of detention is fixed by law in Article 269. What is controlling is the motive of the offender. His purpose is to bring or to conduct the arrested person to the proper authority. Okay, Section 2 on kidnapping of minors. Article 270 provides the penalty for reclusion perpetua to be imposed upon any person who, being entrusted with the custody of a minor, shall deliberately fail to restore the latter to his parents or guardian. Now, the designation of the felony is kidnapping and failure to return a minor. What distinguishes this from kidnapping earlier is that the offender under this article is entrusted with the custody of a minor. While in kidnapping, The perpetrator there is any private individual not entrusted with the custody of the minor. So the elements of kidnapping and failure to return a minor are as follows. The offender is entrusted with the custody of a minor, whether over or under 7 years, but less than 18 years of age. That he deliberately fails to restore the said minor to his parents or guardian. Is there a conflict between Article 267 in kidnapping and Article 270? So we have to remember that in Article 270, this punishes the deliberate failure by the person having the custody of the minor to restore such minor to his parents or guardian. While in Article 267, the kidnapping of a minor is also punished, while under 270, the offender is entrusted with the custody of the minor. In Article 267, the offender is not entrusted with the custody of the victim. 271. Inducing a minor to abandon his home. You have there the penalty for prisión correccional and a fine not exceeding 100,000 pesos to anyone who shall induce a minor to abandon the home of his parents or guardians or the persons entrusted with his custody. Now, please take notice the overt act of the accused here is the inducement upon the minor to abandon his home. If the person committing any of the crimes covered by the two preceding article shall be the father or the mother of the minor, the penalty shall be arresto mayor or a fine not exceeding 40,000 pesos or both. So this refers to the second paragraph refers to the penalty under Article 270 and the first part of Article 271. So, under what circumstance that a parent may be liable for kidnapping and failure to return a minor or inducing a minor to abandon his home? This presupposes a scenario wherein the custody of the minor is awarded solely to a specific parent. In other words, their parents are not legally married, or it could be possible that legally married but there was separation, and it was awarded by the court that the custody of this minor is to this particular parent. Okay, so this is what is meant here by the last paragraph of Article 271. So the penalty here is much lower if the perpetrator is a parent charged for kidnapping, or here in Article 271. Elements of the crime in inducing that the minor is living in the home of his parents or guardians or persons entrusted with his custody, that the offender induces said minor to abandon his home. Now, I mentioned earlier that the overt act of the accused there is the inducement. That inducement has to be actual, committed with criminal intent, and determined by ill will to cause damage. What constitutes is the act of inducing a minor to abandon his home or the home of his guardian, and is not necessary that the minor actually abandons his home. It is the inducement on the part inducing the minor to abandon his home. Again, actual abandonment not necessary for as long as there is that inducement. Now, this case of paalam, that the inducement must be actual. Now, as mentioned in your textbook, the Book of Reyes, this is a scenario wherein a house helper who is a rural lad was charged for inducing a minor to abandon his home. The minor, who is rich, coming from an elite family, and the accused is the supposed servant. Now, she was acquitted as the court ruled that there was no actual inducement by the servant to the minors to abandon his home because the servant there has no moral ascendancy or is not in a position to actually induce this minor to abandon their home. That's why she was acquitted. The inducement to be punishable has to be actual, committed with criminal intent. Slavery. Now, this is included actually in the anti-trafficking in person being one of the purpose. The penalty of prison mayor and a fine of not exceeding 10,000 shall be imposed upon anyone who shall purchase, sell, kidnap, or detain a human being for the purpose of enslaving him. If the crime be committed for the purpose of assigning the offended party to some immoral traffic, the penalty shall be imposed in its maximum period. But if the victim is a victim of trafficking, then I suggest you file a case for trafficking in person under RA 9208 as amended by RA 10364 because the penalty there is higher as compared to the penalty provided here under the RPC. Exploitation of child labor, again, this is also included in the trafficking in person as well as in RA 7610. The penalty of prison correctional in its minimum and medium period and a fine not exceeding 500 pesos shall be imposed upon anyone who under the pretext of reimbursing himself of a debt incurred by an ascendant, guardian, or person entrusted with the custody of a minor shall against the latter's will retain him in his service. So in exploitation of child labor, the child was made to believe that the ascendant or his guardian has a debt and he or she has to pay for the debt. So that is constitutive of exploitation of child labor, which is also an act punishable under uh, RA 7610 for child abuse as well as trafficking in a person. Services rendered under compulsion in payment of a debt, the penalty of aristo mayor in its maximum period to prison correctional minimum shall be imposed upon any person who, in order to require or enforce the payment of a debt, shall compel the debtor to work for him against his will as household servant or farm laborer. Now, under this particular provision, it is the victim or the private offended party who has debt and he is compelled or she is compelled to pay the debt to perform as household servant or house laborer. Now take note, household servant or farm laborer. The private offended party was forced to work in payment of his debt as a household servant or farm laborer. So the elements of the crime is that the offender compels a debtor to work for him either as household servant or farm laborer. Again, it is the debtor who is required to work. The debtor here is the very same offended party. That it is against the debtor's will that the purpose is to require or enforce the payment of a debt. If you notice, this constitutes involuntary servitude, which is also an act, one of the purposes of trafficking in person. Again, you may file trafficking in person for as long as the other elements of trafficking are likewise present. So remember the acts, the means, and the purpose in trafficking in person. And this involuntary servitude is just one of the purposes. Crimes against security. 275, abandonment of person in danger and abandonment of one's own life. Now, this particular provision would come along with those persons who are actually charged for reckless imprudence and then they did not lend any help to their victims. Okay, so let's try to go over Article 275. The penalty of aristo mayor shall be imposed upon anyone who shall fail to render assistance to any person whom he shall find in an uninhabited place, wounded or in danger of dying, when he can render such assistance without detriment to himself, unless such omission shall constitute a more serious offense. Now let's try to dissect the first act punished under 275. The offender here is not the one who wounded or actually or let's say hit or assaulted the offended the victim, but it was him who actually found those victim in an uninhabited place, wounded or in danger of dying. So what is an uninhabited place? So if you recall in Article 14 of the RPC, aside from the fact that it could be a secluded or a place wherein there is no houses or there are only few people that may pass in that particular area, it is a place wherein it would be hard on the part of the victim to receive some help. Now, in this particular scenario, the accused here is in a position to help without detriment to himself. However, he failed to render such assistance. So this is an example of an act of omission. Remember, the RPC penalizes an act or omission. Okay, so act or omission punished under the RPC is what we call as felony. So act by omission, failure to perform, that is 275 paragraph 1. How about number 2? Anyone who shall fail or help or render assistance to another whom he has accidentally wounded or injured, another act of omission, but this time it is the accused himself who actually wounded or injured the victim accidentally. So this is paragraph 2 of Article 275 that usually qualifies reckless imprudence cases. Okay, so that is failure to help or render assistance to another whom he has accidentally wounded or injured. If you notice, these are governed by different provisions of the RPC. Now, next, you have there anyone who, having found an abandoned child under 7 years of age, shall fail to deliver said child to the authorities or to his family, or shall fail to take him to a safe place. Now, paragraph 3 is very subjective because it says here, found an abandoned child under 7 years of age. But what the law promises is your failure to deliver said child to the authority or to the family, or fail to take him to a safe place. Just in case you found an abandoned child under 7. Subjective in the sense that at this point in time, there are lots of many shenanigans or many acts that are to which this child may be used in order to commit robbery on the part of the victim. So just be careful as well. But what the law punishes is the failure on the part of the accused to deliver that abandoned child under 7 years of age to a safe place or to the family or to the authorities. Abandoning a minor, the penalty of arresto mayor and a fine not exceeding 100,000 pesos shall be imposed upon anyone who shall abandon a child under 7 years of age, the custody of which is incumbent upon him. Now, in 276, the perpetrator here has custody of the child in general terms. When the death of the minor shall result from such abandonment, the culprit shall be punished by prison correctional medium and maximum period, but if the life of the minor shall have been in danger only, then the penalty shall be prison correctional in its minimum and medium periods. The provisions contained in the two preceding paragraphs shall not prevent the imposition of a penalty provided for the act committed when the same constitute a more serious offense, such as abandoning the child and it may result to a more serious offense than the act committed by the accused is the other offense and not under 276. Again, the perpetrator here in 276 has custody of the child. The child is under 7 years of age, abandons the child but no intent to kill. The abandonment here refers to a permanent, conscious, and deliberate abandonment. The crime is qualified if death results or the latter was in danger because of the abandonment. Abandonment of minor by persons entrusted with his custody, indifference of parents. Now, what is the overt act punished under 277 and who is the offender in 277? Because they uses the same term as abandonment. But what constitutes abandonment of minor by person entrusted with his custody under Article 277? The penalty of prison mayor and a fine not exceeding 100,000 pesos shall be imposed upon anyone who, having charge of the rearing or education of a minor, shall deliver said minor to a public institution or other persons without the consent of the one who entrusted such child to his care, or in the absence of the latter without the consent of the proper authorities. So if you notice earlier in 276, I've mentioned there that the offender there has custody of the minor in general terms. Because in 277, the custody here of the offender is pertains to the rearing or education of a minor, meaning to say he is entrusted with the rearing or education of the minor and or she abandoned the minor. This is so what shall be done by the accused so that he would not be made liable criminally for abandonment? You have there, deliver the minor to a public institution with the consent of the one who entrusted such child to his care or with the consent of the proper authorities. Meaning to say, there has to be delivery of the custody of the minor so that the minor would not be put into danger. Next paragraph, the same penalty shall be imposed upon the parents who shall neglect their children by not giving them the education with their station in life require and financial conditions permit. Paragraph 2 actually refers to indifference of parents. Now, while in paragraph 1, it may refer to a grandparent entrusted with the rearing of the child by the son or daughter, probably who is an OFW. So, money is sent to the grandmother to support the rearing and education of the children, but there are some who actually abandon the minor despite the fact that they are the one being entrusted with the custody. So that may fall under paragraph 1. In the next paragraph, for indifference of parents, it is the parents who has the capacity, financial capacity for that matter, to send their children to school, to the best school, because it refers to giving them the education which their station in life require and financial conditions permit. In other words, the parents can afford to send the best school to the best school their children, and yet despite their financial conditions they send them to let's say not the best despite the fact of their capability to afford. So that is indifference to parents. So let's try to illustrate. In abandoning a minor under 276, the custody of the offender is stated in general. So this is the one I mentioned in general terms. In 277, the custody of the offender is specific, that is custody for the rearing or education of the minor. In 276, the minor is under 7. In 277, the minor is under 18 years of age. While in 276, the minor is abandoned in such a way as to deprive him of the care and protection that his tender years need. In 277, the minor is delivered to a public institution or other person without the consent of the person who entrusted the rearing of the child to the accused. Let's go over the elements of each paragraph as defined under the law. In paragraph 1, in abandonment of the minor by person entrusted with the custody, the offender is charged of the rearing or education of the minor. Minor here is below 18. That he delivers said minor to a public institution or other persons. That the one who entrusted such child to the offender has not consented to the act, or if one entrusted such child is the offender is absent, the proper authorities have not consented to it. How about on indifference of parents in paragraph 2? The offender is a parent. He neglects his children by not giving them education. His station in life requires his education and his financial condition permits it. So let's try to analyze this case of Miraflores. Obligation to educate children terminates if mother and children refuse without good reason to live with accused. Now, what happened in this particular case of Miraflores is that the accused was transferred to another place because of work. It was a call of duty on the part of the accused. But the mother and the child refused to go with the accused. So they now charge the accused under this particular provision of the law that he failed to send the child to the school he wanted by not going with the accused. So the court ruled that it was not intentional, and in fact it was the fault on the part of the mother and the child because they refuse without good reason to live with the accused. So that is the case of Mira Flores. In Francisco, failure to give education must be due to deliberate desire to evade such obligation. Meaning to say, it must be intentional. We cannot also demand to our parents to send us to the best school, best law school, if our parents cannot afford it. So that would not constitute indifference of parents. Exploitation of minors, penalty of prison correctional, minimum and medium, and a fine not exceeding 100,000 shall be imposed upon any person who shall cause any boy or girl under 16 years of age to perform any dangerous feat of balancing, physical strength, or contortion. So this refers to what do you call that? Exhibition, the gymnast thing, the flying there. So this is considered exploitation if you have there the boy or girl is under 16 to perform this dangerous activity. So that involves feat of balancing, physical strength, or contortion. Any person who, being an acrobat, gymnast, rope walker, diver, wild animal tamer, or circus manager, or engage in a similar calling, shall employ in exhibitions in these kinds children under 16 who are not his children or descendants. So we can say that under paragraph 2, if he be the gymnast or the acrobat and he is actually employing children, he would not be made criminally liable under this article if he be an ascendant and the child is not under 16, meaning to say 16, 17. That would be sufficient, or the minor would be capable or ready to be trained to do such dangerous activities. So that would be the defense on the part of the ascendant under paragraph 2. Next, any person engaged in any of the callings enumerated in the next proceeding who shall employ any descendant of his under 12 in such of years in such dangerous exhibition. So, you have please take notice of the age requirement. So the any person here is the ascendant, okay, who requires his descendant under 12 to perform such dangerous exhibitions, other than the one being mentioned here, specifically under paragraph 2. Next, any ascendant, guardian, teacher, or person entrusted in any capacity with the care of a child under 16 who shall deliver such child gratuitously to any person following any of the callings enumerated in paragraph 2 or to any habitual vagrant or beggar. Now, this is a situation before to which parents who wanted to escape the responsibility over their children to not to sell, because here it must be gratuitous, to give to these persons their children so that they would not be a burden of feeding their children. So that is what is meant there by paragraph 4. If the delivery shall have been made in consideration of any price, compensation, or promise, then the penalty shall be imposed. First paragraph, gratuitous. If it is with consideration, then the maximum penalty shall be imposed upon the ascendant, guardian, teacher, or person entrusted with the care of the child under 16. In either case, the guardian or curator convicted shall also be removed from his office as guardian or curator, and in the case of parents, they shall be deprived temporarily or perpetually in the discretion of the court of their parental authority over the child or minor. Any person who shall induce any child under 16 to abandon the home of his ascendant, guardian, curator, or teacher to follow any person engaged in any of the callings mentioned in paragraph 2 shall be liable as well. Exploitation of minors under paragraph 5 versus inducing a minor. So we are referring to this particular provision. If the purpose of inducing the minor to abandon the home is to follow any person engaged in any of the callings of being an acrobat, gymnast, rope walker, diver, wild animal tamer, or circus manager, or to accompany any habitual vagrant or beggar, it is exploitation of minor. Absent such purpose, then it shall be Article 271. 279 is not a felony, but it would tell us an additional penalty. The imposition of the penalties prescribed in the preceding article shall not prevent the imposition upon the same person of the penalty provided for any other felonies defined and punished under this code, without violating the right against double jeopardy. Trespass to dwelling. When shall trespass to dwelling be qualified? Any private person who shall enter the dwelling against the latter's will shall be punished by aristo mayor and a fine not exceeding 200,000 pesos, and the same shall be qualified if the same be committed by means of violence or intimidation. So if you notice here in Article 280, the perpetrator here is any private person. Because if the perpetrator is a public officer or employee, the crime would have been violation of domicile. So here, Again, the accused here is a private person. He enters the dwelling against the latter's will. But if the same is committed by means of violence or intimidation, then the crime of trespass to dwelling is qualified. The next paragraph is an absolutory cause. The provisions of this article shall not be applicable to any person who shall enter another's dwelling for the purpose of preventing some serious harm to himself, the occupants of the dwelling, or third person, or shall it be applicable to any person who shall enter the dwelling for the purpose of rendering some service to humanity or justice, or to anyone who shall enter cafes, taverns, inn, and other public houses while the same are open. So if you recall in Article 12, absolutory causes, these are among those absolutory causes. So, meaning to say, if the purpose there of the entrance is to prevent some harm, then that would absolve the accused from any criminal liability. Or if the purpose there of the entrance is to render some service to humanity because somebody shouted help, so the accused there entered the dwelling to render some service or help. Absolutory cause. Absolutory cause, just like an exempting circumstance, is a matter of defense. By reason of public policy, no penalty is imposed upon the accused, but it shall be incumbent upon the accused that these are his purpose in his entrance against the latter's will. That the offender is a private person, he enters the dwelling of another, the entrance is against the latter's will. Again, the crime is qualified if the same is committed by means of violence or intimidation. If offender is a public officer or employee, the crime is violation of domicile. So let's recall dwelling place as used in this article means any building or structure exclusively devoted for rest and comfort as distinguished from places devoted to business or offices. So in your article 14 on dwelling as aggravating, to be aggravating, it must be used exclusively for rest and comfort. You have there a scenario as well that it is an apartment, ground floor, second floor. Ground floor is used for commercial purposes. The second floor is considered to be dwelling for as long as there is a separate entrance in going to the second floor. A store of cheap goods, which also the dwelling place of the owner, was considered dwelling, but but for purposes of trespass to dwelling, but not as an aggravating circumstance as provided under Article 14, because to constitute as aggravating, dwelling there must be used exclusively for rest and comfort. But for purposes of trespass to dwelling, in the case of lamahang, it is considered to be dwelling, even if it is also used as a store on the part of the private offended party. Whether building is dwelling house or not depends upon the use to which it is put. Dwelling includes a room when occupied by another person. An entrance into the dwelling must be against the will of the owner or occupant. So let's try to dig deeper on this case of lamahang because this is a store. To constitute trespass to dwelling, the store has to be closed already. Otherwise, it would be hard for the prosecution to prove that the entrance there was against the will of the owner or occupant. What is intended to be protected and preserved by law in punishing trespass is the privacy of one's dwelling. And when we say qualified because there was violence or intimidation, the violence there could either be applied against the person of the offended party or to the property of the offended party. Some illustrations: trespass by means of violence, pushing the door violently, and maltreating the occupants after entering. So that is qualified trespass to dwelling. Cutting of a ribbon or string with which the door latch of a closed room was fastened. The cutting of the fastenings of the door was an act of violence. Wounding by means of a bolo, the owner of the house, immediately after entrance. So that is trespass by means of violence. Now, under this RCAO, you might argue that there was no prohibition by the offended party. Now, how could the offended party prevent the accused when after entrance immediately he was hacked? Okay, so that would still constitute qualified trespass to dwelling. Trespass by means of intimidation, firing a revolver in the air by persons attempting to force their way into the house, or flourishing a bolo against inmates of the house upon gaining entrance. So that is trespass by means of intimidation. This one, the mere flourishing, because no one was hurt. If someone was injured because of the bolo, then it shall constitute by means of violence, not anymore by means of intimidation. Violence or intimidation may take place immediately after the entrance. Prohibition not necessary when violence or intimidation is employed by the offender. All trespassers ordinarily have intention to commit another crime. But if there is no overt act of the crime intended to be committed, the crime is only trespass to dwelling. What this case of Barnido tell us is that if there is another crime committed by the accused, then the accused is not only liable for trespass or cannot be made liable for trespass, but shall be made criminally liable for the other felony he committed. And dwelling there may aggravate that trespassing there is absorbed in the other crime committed by the accused. That is what is meant by the case of U.S. versus Barnido. Other forms of trespass. The penalty of arresto minor or a fine not exceeding 40,000 pesos or both shall be imposed upon any person who shall enter the closed premises or the fenced estate of another, while either of them are uninhabited, if the prohibition to enter be manifest, and the trespasser has not secured the permission of the owner or the caretaker thereof. So if you notice in 281, it does not involve a dwelling place, but a closed estate or fenced estate. To constitute other forms of trespass, the prohibition there must be manifest. That's why you see there in a fenced estate, no trespassing. So the trespassing there is manifest, and if you enter therein without the consent of the owner or the caretaker, that constitutes other forms of trespass. Elements of the crime: the offender enters the closed premises or fenced estate of another, that the entrance is made while either of them is uninhabited, that the prohibition to enter be manifest, and that the trespasser has not secured the permission of the owner or the caretaker thereof. So let's try to distinguish trespass to dwelling from other forms of trespass. So in trespass to dwelling, the offender is a private person, while in other forms, any person, either private or public officer. The offender enters a dwelling house in trespass to dwelling. In other forms, the offender enters a closed premises or a fenced estate. In trespass to dwelling, the place entered is inhabited, while in other forms the place is uninhabited. It may include a barn. In trespass, the entrance to dwelling is against the latter's will. In other forms, the entrance to a closed premise or fenced estate is without securing the permission of the owner or caretaker. In trespass, the prohibition to enter is express or implied, while in other forms, the prohibition to enter must be manifest. So it is sufficient that it be manifest. Grave threats. Now, other than kidnapping, grave threats is a favorite felony that is a bar potential. So let's try to learn with all our might grave threats because this is very common. When shall there be grave threats? How is grave threats committed? Any person who shall threaten another with the infliction upon the person, owner, or property of the latter or of his family of any wrong amounting to a crime. That is grave threat. Who is liable? Any person. Overt act, threatening another with infliction upon the person, owner, or property of the offended party or that of his family of any wrong amounting to a crime. The threat there must amount to a crime. What shall be the penalty? The penalty next lower in degree than that prescribed by law for the crime he threatened to commit if the offender shall have made the threat demanding money or imposing any other condition, even though not unlawful, and said offender shall have attained his purpose. So, let's try to dissect paragraph 1. When we say penalty next lower in degree, for example, I will kill you. Killing could be homicide, which carries with it a penalty of reclusion temporal. And the law says next lower in degree. So next lower in degree of reclusion temporal is prison mayor. I hope by now you already have mastered the table of penalties so that it would be easy for you to determine a degree lower on a prescribed or from a particular penalty. Now, that would be the penalty to be imposed. Now, take note that here in paragraph 1, this would tell us that the grave threat there was made subject to a condition. And what is that condition? The threat being made demanding money or imposing any other condition. That condition could be lawful or unlawful. So, um, first kind of grave threat is if it is committed with demand for money or subject to a condition. Let's try to continue paragraph 1. If the offender shall not have attained his purpose, then the penalty lower by 2 degrees shall be imposed. Meaning to say, there was demand for money or there was a condition, but the accused has not attained his purpose, either on the demand of money or to the condition he imposed. So, the penalty shall be 2 degrees lower. Okay, so that is the first kind of grave threat. If the threat be made in writing or through a middleman, the penalty shall be imposed in its maximum period. We have to refer this to paragraph 1 or the first kind of grave threat, that is with demand for money or subject to a condition. If it was done in writing or through a middleman, then the maximum period of the prescribed penalty shall be imposed upon him. Judge, what penalty? Go back. next lower in degree, or lower by 2 degrees, depending on whether the accused has attained his purpose or not, as provided under the first kind of grave threat. Second kind of grave threat. The penalty of arresto mayor and a fine not exceeding 100,000 pesos if the threat shall not have been made subject to a condition. What does the second kind of grave threat mean? That a person threaten another upon his person, honor, or property, or that of his family, any wrong amounting to a crime, but not subject to a condition. It is governed by 282, paragraph 2. And this is the second kind of grave threat. To emphasize, there are two kinds of grave threat provided under 282, but there are actually three kinds of grave threat, and we will tackle the other one later, as it is governed by another provision of the law. This would mean that after this lecture, you shall proceed to your LMS and you shall answer there the assignment that I will be putting on the LMS, and you have to comply it within a period of 10 minutes only. So I hope that is clear, because that is my way of monitoring whether or not you have actually attended the online class. So act Spanish in 282, by threatening another with the infliction upon his person, honor, or property, or that of his family, any wrong amounting to a crime, demanding money, or imposing any other condition, even though not unlawful, and the offender attained his purpose. And the second is by making such threat without the offender attaining his purpose. So the penalty is 2 degrees lower. By threatening another with the infliction upon his person, honor, or property, or that of his family, any wrong amounting to a crime, the threat not subject to a condition. So 1 and 2 here, again, this is the first kind of grave threat. The threat there is coupled with a demand for money, or there is the imposition of a condition. And the second one is under number 3, the threat there was made not subject to a condition. All has to amount to a crime. The threat has to amount to a crime. Is it necessary that the wrong threatened to be inflicted must amount to any of the crimes against person, honor, or against property? No, because the threat may be a crime against liberty. Example, A threatened B that unless the latter will send him 1,000, he would kidnap his son. It is believed that the crime committed is grave threats. Such a threat affects the person of a member of the family of the offended party, and the crime there is crimes against liberty and security. Elements of grave threat where offender attained his purpose. First form, or the first kind of grave threat, that the offender threatens another with the infliction upon the latter's person, honor, or property, or upon that of the latter's family, of any wrong, that such wrong amounts to a crime, that there is a demand for money, or that any other condition is imposed, even though not unlawful, that the offender attains his purpose. To illustrate, A sent a letter to B in which A said that unless B would send to him 1,000 pesos, A would kill B. B sent 1,000 to A. The threat to kill B involves a crime against person of B, which is homicide. Okay, so that is threat to commit a crime upon the person of the offended party. Now, how about if the threat is upon the property of the offended party? A sent to C and B to tell. A sent to A and B to tell as in fact he told the latter that if he would not send 1,000, A would burn B's house. B sent the money to A. The threat to burn the house of B involves a crime against his property, which is arson. So if you notice here in these two illustrations, there were demand for money. And the accused here attains his purpose. So the penalty to be imposed upon him shall be 1 degree lower than the crime he threatened to commit. Now, threat upon the honor. A told B that unless the latter would give him 1,000, he would place inside his house a tin of opium, and then he would report the matter to the police. B sent 1,000 to A. The threat involves the crime of incriminating an innocent person. Okay, so that is threat to commit a crime upon the honor of the offended party, and it is also coupled with demand for money. So that is grave threat of the first form or the first kind of grave threat. In the imposition of conditions, still, we are still on the first kind of grave threat. The condition there need not be unlawful. A seduced B's daughter. Because A refused to marry her, B threatened A with death unless A would marry his said daughter. Is B liable for grave threats? Yes. B threatened A with the infliction upon his person a wrong amounting to a crime, which is actually homicide, imposing a condition unless A would marry his daughter. To marry need not be unlawful. In fact, it is lawful. A told B that if the latter would not give his daughter in marriage to A would kill B. There is no demand for money, but a condition consisting in that B should give his daughter in marriage to A is imposed. So let's try to illustrate a scenario wherein the offender does not attain his purpose so that the penalty lower by 2 degrees shall be imposed upon the accused. A was madly in love with B, a woman. B rejected A. Thereupon, A threatened to kidnap or kill B if she would not treat him well. Because of fear, B moved and sought protection in the house of her cousin. A wrote a letter and asked C to deliver it to B, threatening that if she would not leave her hiding place and go with him, he would kill her and her relatives. When B received the letter, she immediately showed it to her cousin, and on the same day, the matter was reported to the police. A is guilty of the crime of grave threats. A did not attain his purpose for which he wrote the letter because then of the intervention of the police to whom the matter was reported. So penalty for the grave threat under this set of facts shall be imposed 2 degrees lower. Elements of grave threat not subject to a condition. This is the grave threat in the second form or the second kind of grave threat. That the offender threatens another with the infliction upon the latter's person, honor, or property, or upon that of the latter's family of any wrong, that such wrong amounts to a crime, that the threat is not subject to a condition. Let's try to illustrate. The records show that at around 7:30 in the evening, Julia Dinido left her house to go to the barangay hall to report the mauling of her husband, which she witnessed earlier at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. On her way there, petitioner confronted her and pointed a gun to her forehead, while at the same time saying, "Saan ka pupunta? Gusto mo ito?" Considering what transpired earlier, between petitioner and Julia's husband, petitioner's act of pointing a gun at Julia's forehead clearly shows a threat to kill or to inflict serious physical injury on her person. Action speaks louder than words. Taken in the context of the surrounding circumstances, the uttered words do not go against the threat to kill or to inflict serious injury events by petitioner's accompanying act. So, the threat there is merely saan ka pupunta, gusto mo ito. So, it amounts to a crime in the sense that it was taken from the context of what happened earlier, that there was mauling and the accused is um have shown his intent to kill the victim. So, no condition imposed. Second kind of grave threat. The third form or the third kind of grave threat, it is actually found in Article 285. But for purposes of grave threat, it's on your screen now. Either the first form, second form, and it has to be serious and deliberate. Are those made with deliberate purpose of creating in the mind of the other person threaten the belief that the threats will be carried into effect. The threat should not be made in the heat of anger. In other words, in Article 285, which says other forms of threat, it has to be done not in the heat of anger. Meaning to say, the accused there did the threat with deliberateness or seriousness. So again, based on my instruction earlier, after the lecture, you will proceed with your LMS and you have to enumerate the three kinds of grave threat, and I will just designate it as assignment dash title 9, and it shall be open for 10 minutes only. Light threats under Article 283. Any threat to commit a wrong not constituting a crime made in a manner expressed in subdivision 1 of the next preceding article shall be punished by arresto mayor. So if you notice in light threats, it's easy to distinguish it from grave threat because in grave threat, the threat there amounts to a crime. But in light threat, it does not amount to a crime. The wrong there is not does not constitute a crime. The offender makes a threat to commit a wrong, but the wrong does not constitute a crime. It could be that there's still demand for money or that a condition is imposed even though not unlawful, and the offender has attained his purpose or that he has not attained his purpose. What distinguishes this from grave threat is that the threat here does not amount to a crime. Manner of commission, it could be the same as that of grave threat. Blackmailing may be punished under Article 283. May only because it would depend upon the threat. Does it amount to a crime or it does not amount to a crime? A threatens B with accusation or exposure if B does not give 1,000. The unlawful extortion of money by an appeal to the fear of the victim or by threats of accusation or exposure. So, telling the BIR perhaps that you are not paying your taxes is not a crime, but it may constitute light threats because it is still blackmailing. Ban for good behavior. In all cases falling within the next two preceding articles, such as grave threat or life threat, the person making the threat may also be required to give bail, not to molest the person threatened, or if he shall fail to give such bail, he shall be sentenced to destierro. Okay, so that is ban for good behavior. Other light threats. Here we can see the third kind of grave threat. The penalty of aristo minor in its minimum period or a fine not exceeding 40,000 shall be imposed upon any person who, without being included in the provisions in the next preceding article, shall threaten another with a weapon or draw such a weapon in a quarrel unless it be in lawful self-defense. So drawing of weapon during a quarrel and no further molestation, it is constitutive of other light threat. Paragraph 2 gave us the third kind of grave threat. Any person who it may give us the third kind of grave threat, sorry. Any person who, in the heat of anger, shall orally threaten another with some harm, not constituting a crime, and who by subsequent acts show that he did not persist in the idea involved in his threat, provided that the circumstances of the offense shall not bring it within the provisions of Article 282 of this code. 282 grave threats. If you notice, I enclose in parentheses not because it would appear that this particular word here is misplaced. Okay, it should constitute a crime, but it was done in the heat of anger to make it other light threats. Because if the threat that amount to a crime and it was not done in the heat of anger, that is grave threat, punished under Article 282, hence the third kind of grave threat. Any person who shall orally threaten to do another any harm, not constituting a felony. If you notice under paragraph 3, this may sound similar to that of light threats because the threat here does not constitute a felony. But we will try to distinguish them. So other light threats in 285 versus grave threats in 282 and other light threats in 283. Threats under paragraph 2 of 285 is similar to the third form of grave threat because the harm threatened to be committed is a crime. Okay, that is clear. Threat under paragraph 3 is similar to light threats because the harm threatened to be committed is not a crime. That is also very clear. But what distinguishes them? The difference lies in the fact that in the other light threats, here this one, there is no demand for money or that there is no condition imposed. And in paragraph 2 of 285, the threat there is not deliberate because it was done by the accused in the heat of anger. Okay, I hope that is clear. Let's proceed with grave coercion 286. The penalty of prisión correccional and a fine not exceeding 100,000 pesos shall be imposed upon any person who, without authority of law, shall by means of violence, threats, or intimidation prevent another from doing something not prohibited by law or compel him to do something against his will, whether it be right or wrong. So if you notice in grave coercion, there are two acts punished. Prevent another from doing something or compelling him to do something. If the coercion be committed in violation of the exercise of the right of suffrage or for the purpose of compelling another to perform any religious act or to prevent him from exercising such right or from so doing such act, the penalty next higher in degree shall be imposed. So again, there are two acts punished for grave coercion: preventing another by means of violence, threats, or intimidation from doing something not prohibited by law, or by compelling another by means of violence, threats, or intimidation to do something against his will, whether it be right or wrong. So the elements of the crime are as follows. that a person prevented another from doing something not prohibited by law or that compelled him to do something against his will, be it right or wrong. That the prevention or compulsion be effected by violence, threats, or intimidation, and that the person that restrained the will and liberty of another has not the authority of law or the right to do so, or in other words, that the restraint shall not be made under authority of law or in the exercise of any lawful right. So if you notice here in grave coercion, the accused here puts the law into his hands. Let's try to illustrate coercion by preventing, which is the first act punished as grave coercion. A was harvesting palay on a disputed piece of land. B, claiming to have a right to the property by means of violence, prevented A from harvesting the palay. What is prevented must not be prohibited by law, which is actually present in the case. It was not prohibited. And in fact, both of them are claiming to have the right to the property. That's why A there harvested the palay over a disputed piece of land to which B as well is claiming to have right to the property. But he prevented A from doing something against his will with violence in this particular case. Thus, no coercion is committed by one who prevents a murderer from carrying out his wicked purpose. Meaning to say, here, he prevented the accused from doing something, but the prevention, the act which he sought to prevent is not punished by law. Hence, it is not, uh, eh, it, uh, it, i- the act he seeks that he wants to prevent is not prohibited by law. Hence, it is grave coercion. In this particular scenario, he prevented a person from killing. He cannot be made liable for grave coercion because what the act he seeks to prevent is an act punished or prohibited by law. Okay, so under this set of facts, no coercion is committed by one who prevents a murderer from carrying out his wicked purpose because murder is prohibited by law. To constitute grave coercion, the act the accused seeks to prevent must not be prohibited by law. In grave coercion, the act of preventing by force must be made at the time the offended party was doing or about to do the act to be prevented. If the act was already done when violence is exerted, then the crime would be unjust vexation because there is nothing more to prevent. Okay? Coercion by compelling. The accused took a 60-year-old woman to a grove of kamatsili trees where they slapped and maltreated her, took off her drawers and bound her hands and feet, while one of them fired a shot at the ground to compel her to admit having stolen the clothes of one of the accused. The accused testified that they merely endeavor to bring the complainant to the Teniente del Barrio for investigation. Such purpose certainly does not excuse their compelling her to go with them if she was not willing to do so, and they admittedly had no warrant for her arrest for any lawful authorization to force her to go with them. Coercion is committed by the unauthorized compelling of another person against his will to do something whether it just or unjust. Its essence being attack to the individual liberty. Again, the accused here puts the law into their hand. Now, if they wanted to for the private offended party, if they are thinking that this offended party was really responsible for the stealing of the clothes, then they could have filed a case against the old woman. Same thing here. Here, in the palay, the accused here could have filed ETRO perhaps to prevent the accused to prevent the other party from harvesting the palay, considering that the property is still disputed. So, essence, do not put the law into your hands. When the complainant is in the actual possession of a thing, even if he has no right to that possession, compelling him by means of violence to give up the possession, even by the owner himself, is grave coercion. Again, what you should do is to seek the help of the law by filing a case in court. It is a maxim of the law that no man is authorized to take the law into his hands and enforce his rights with threats or violence, except, of course, in certain well-defined cases where the ones in the where where one acts in the where one act in the necessary defense of one's life, liberty, or property. So the exception there is talking about self-defense. Okay, self-defense. And to claim or invoke self-defense, there must be unlawful aggression. And we emphasized before that not all aggression are unlawful. There are so-called lawful aggression, wherein if the aggression is so-called lawful, then you cannot invoke self-defense. The least that you can do is to file a case before the proper authority. Let's try to compare it with this case. Suppose the Carabaos were in A's possession and B wanted to get them because they had entered his rice paddies and caused considerable damage thereto. And A, by means of violence and intimidation, prevented B from taking them. Is A liable for grave coercion? The answer is no. As the owner and actual possessor of the Carabaos, A had the right to use such force as may be reasonably necessary to prevent B from dispossessing him of his property. A scenario of self-defense, because there was unlawful aggression. When the act of preventing is another crime, the crime committed is not grave coercion but the other crime. When the act of compelling is another offense, the crime committed is not grave coercion but the other crime. The force or violence must be immediate, actual, or imminent in grave coercion. These first two principles would tell us that if there is another crime committed by your act of preventing or your act of compelling, then the other crime is the crime committed by the accused and not grave coercion. To illustrate, there is a right to prevent in this case. So since there is a right to prevent, then there is no coercion. Thus, no coercion is committed by a father who, with violence, prevents his unemancipated son from leaving his home just to loiter around the streets. Under the law, the father has a right to discipline his unemancipated child. Meaning to say, the act of the father here is not prohibited by law. A tenant who used force to prevent himself from being deprived of the possession of a parcel of land which he had already cultivated is not guilty of grave coercion, even against the landlord. Okay? The tenant can rightfully exercise his right and invoke self-defense. Now, the following, there is a right to compel. An insane attempted to enter the house of one sick of cholera. The doctor in attendance at the request of the wife of the patient compelled by force and even threatened to shoot the insane man with a revolver in order to compel him to leave the house. So in the case of Calvo, the doctor is not liable for coercion. The doctor merely acted in accordance with the exercise of his profession. One of the justifying circumstances. Aside from self-defense. Of course, you have their exercise of a lawful right or profession. A person who takes the law into his hands with violence is guilty of grave coercion. Coercion is consummated even if the offended party did not accede to the purpose of the coercion. Grave coercion is different from illegal detention because in the latter, there is actual confinement or restraint of the person which is actually absent in grave coercion. Light coercion. Any person who by means of violence shall seize anything belonging to his debtor for the purpose of applying the same to the payment of the debt shall suffer the penalty of arresto mayor in its minimum and a fine equivalent to the value of the thing, but in no case to be less than 15,000 pesos. So paragraph 1, constituting light coercion, this is the taking by the creditor of anything belonging to the debtor for the purposes of applying it to the debt. That is light coercion. In paragraph 2, this is what we call as unjust vexation. This is a catch-all provision. If it does not fall to grave coercion or light coercion, then it may be considered to be unjust vexation. And you have there the penalty to be imposed upon the accused. Elements for paragraph 1. The offender must be a creditor. He seizes anything belonging to his debtor. The seizure, the thing is accomplished by means of violence or a display of material force producing intimidation. The purpose of the offender is to apply the same to the payment of the debt. Now, please take notice, all the elements must concur. To illustrate, the accused demanded payment from a Chinaman of the latter's debt, but he had no money with which to pay him. With his cargadores, the accused took from the store of the Chinaman all the goods which the latter had. The accused ignored the opposition of the Chinaman, who could not do anything because the accused had a revolver. The goods were forcibly taken away by the Chinaman. Remember, the offender here must be a creditor of the offended party. There is light coercion on the part of the accused committed against the Chinaman because there was seizing of the goods of the Chinaman as payment for the debt incurred by the Chinaman, and it was committed by means of intimidation. But if the taking of the thing belonging to the debtor through deceit and misrepresentation for the purpose of applying the same to the payment of the debt, the crime is unjust vexation. Why unjust vexation? Because it was not committed by means of violence or intimidation, but the seizure there was committed through deceit or misrepresentation. How about unjust vexation? Unjust vexation includes any human conduct which, although not productive of some physical or material harm, would, however, unjustly annoy or vex an innocent person. The paramount question to be considered in determining whether the crime is unjust vexation is committed is whether the offender's act cause annoyance, irritation, vexation, torment, distress, or disturbance to the mind of the person to whom it is directed. Remember, in unjust vexation, no violence or intimidation is committed by the accused. Other similar coercion. The penalty of arresto mayor or a fine ranging from 40,000 to 100,000 pesos or both shall be imposed upon any person, agent, or officer of any association or corporation who shall force or compel directly or indirectly or shall knowingly permit any laborer or employee employed by him or by such firm or corporation to be forced or compelled to purchase merchandise or commodities of any kind. So if you notice here in other similar coercions, it could be payment of the salary through payment in kind, okay, of the merchandise or the goods sold by the employer, or compelling the employee to purchase the goods or merchandise of the employer. The same penalty shall be imposed upon any person who shall pay the wages due a laborer or employee employed by him by means of tokens or objects other than the legal tender, legal currency of the laborer or employee. So Act Spanish, forcing or compelling directly or indirectly, or knowingly permitting the forcing or compelling of the laborer or employee of the offender to purchase merchandise or commodities of any kind from him by paying the wages due his laborers or employee by means of tokens or objects other than legal tender currency of the Philippines. You have there unless requested by such laborer or employee. Now, this does not involve, cannot be the one is so-called as bali or utang. So they took uh, a good or merchandise from their employee because the payment of the wages is still at the end of the month and they have no more rice, for example, and the employer is selling rice. So that would be upon the request of the laborer that he will be getting the rice from the employer to be the payment to be deducted, to be considered as a deduction from the wage. And that is not other similar coercion. Okay, so that is not covered. So elements for other similar coercion, the offender is any person, agent, or officer of the association or corporation that he or such firm or corporation has employed laborers or employees. He forces or compels, directly or indirectly, or knowingly permits to be forced or compel any of his laborers or employees to purchase merchandise or commodities of any kind from him or from said firm or corporation. The gist of the crime is the force or the compulsion on the employee or the laborer. For paragraph 2, that the offender pays the wages due to laborer or employee by means of tokens or objects, that those tokens or objects are other than the legal tender currency of the Philippines, that the employee or laborer does not expressly request that he be paid by means of tokens or objects. 289, formation, maintenance, and prohibition of combination of capital or labor through violence or threats. The penalty of Aristo Mayor and a fine not exceeding 60,000 pesos, shall be imposed upon any person who, for the purpose of organizing, maintaining, or preventing coalitions or capital or labor, strike or laborers or lockout of employees shall employ violence or threats in such a degree as to compel or force the laborers or employers in the free and legal exercise of their industry or work if the act shall not constitute a more serious offense in accordance with the provisions of this code. So we can say that this is a catch-all provision. If you cannot use the provision under the labor code, then you have there. But take note, the penalty here is so low. Okay, so the relative provision again is one that is provided under the Labor Code of the Philippines. So the elements, the offender employs violence or threats in such as a degree to compel or force the laborers or employers in the free or legal exercise of their industry or work to organize, maintain, or prevent coalition. So that is the elements of the crime. So 290, discovery and revelation of secrets. Discovering secrets through seizure of correspondence. The penalty of prison correctional minimum and medium and a fine not exceeding 100,000 pesos shall be imposed upon any private individual who, in order to discover the secrets of another, shall seize his papers or letters and reveal the contents thereof. If the offender shall not reveal such secret, then the penalty shall be arresto mayor and a fine not exceeding 100,000 pesos. But please take notice that this provision shall not be applicable to parents, guardians, or persons entrusted with the custody of the minors with respect to the papers or letters of the children or minors placed under their care or custody, nor to spouses with respect to papers or letters of either of them. The offender is a private individual or even public officer not in the exercise of his official function. He seizes the papers or letters of another. The purpose is to discover the secrets of another, and the offender is informed of the contents of the papers or letters seized. This means to place in the control of someone a thing or to give him the possession thereof, and accordingly it is not necessary that in the act there should be force or violence. Revealing secrets with abuse of office. You have there the penalty of aristo mayor and fine not exceeding 100,000 pesos shall be imposed upon the manager, employee, or servant who, in such capacity, shall learn the secrets of his principal or master and shall reveal such secrets. Now, take note that in 291, it is required that there be revelation of the secrets of the principal or master by the manager, employee, or servant. The offender is a manager, employee, or servant. He learns of the secrets of his principal or master, and then he reveals such secret. To constitute the crime, the secrets there must be learned by the offender by reason of the employment. And please take notice, damage is not necessary. Revelation of industrial secrets. Now, in revelation of industrial secrets, this applies to a person in charge, employee, or workman of any manufacturing or industrial establishment, who, to the prejudice of the owner, therefore, shall reveal the secrets of the industry of the latter. So that is revealing industrial secrets. Now, how is this committed? Now, this applies only to the offender who is in charge or employee or workman of a manufacturing or industrial establishment. Take note, manufacturing or industrial establishment. That the manufacturing or industrial establishment has a secret of the industry which the offender has learned. So we are referring to trade secrets of the manufacturing firm or the industrial establishment. The offender reveals such secrets that prejudice is caused to the owner. Now, when shall revealing such secret not violated? Thus, if the offender uses it for his personal use without revealing it to others, then the crime is not committed. Okay? So, for example, manufacturing, let's say you are a former employee of this uh, manufacturing uh, establishment involved in baking pastries, for example. Of course, this particular establishment has trade secrets. Sometimes you have their employees, or whether we like it or not, employees come and go. And when they resign from the establishment, they have the trade secrets with them uh, that they learn from the company, and they opened their own business for that purpose. So it's not revealing industrial secrets. They cannot be made liable under this particular provision of the law. What is prohibited is revealing it to others. Revelation either during or after being connected with the establishment. That's why sometimes you have there the non-disclosure. There is that period of time, or let's say lifetime, because those are industrial or trade secrets. Okay, so that ends Title 9. I hope you've learned something today. With that, thank you and good day.